Welcome to the Navigating Sports Business Podcast. I'm Charles Rolston, VP of Consulting at Navigate, joined by Navigate's founder, AJ Maestas. We're doing a fun episode today where we're going to share some predictions for the industry, and to hold ourselves accountable, we'll revisit these a year from now and score ourselves on what we got right, what we got wrong, and what surprised us. And AJ, as you say, we're in the business of predicting the future for our clients, so let's see how we do. We can't really cover every topic in sports business in one podcast, so we've pulled our favorite, most consequential storylines across media, college sports, betting, and team economics. So let's get right into it with a big one. Do we have a new NFL media deal by this time next year? And just to set you up a little bit, the current NFL deal is just over $110 billion in total. It's around $9 to $10 billion per year. Some journalists say that the next deal could reach 150 or 200 billion, with some say that the NFL is pushing internally for double what they're currently getting. And Goodell, I mean, his renegotiation could, he said that the renegotiation could begin as early as 2026, and his contract is up in 2027. So he's certainly incentivized to announce a big win before that next contract comes up. So what are your thoughts? Do we get an NFL deal by this time next year?
Sure. Yeah. Why not? All joking aside, though, I mean, certainly if they go back out, they're going to get more money. So if you're the NFL, why would you not? I mean, there are reasons, obviously, you're under contract and what have you, but, we all know the NFL dominates ratings and audience and interest here in the US. So they're must-have content. And I think the NBA deal really revealed something new. What they're getting $233 million per year per team. So it's a $7 billion deal, 11 years. Most important, I guess I would say a metric like 3 times more money than the NFL on a per viewer basis. I think that would surprise a lot of people to know that. So you have to believe the NFL league office is thinking, wait a minute, there's more for us out there. And we know there's bidders, there's interested parties, right? There's a bunch of streaming platforms that want premier content. And so, yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I agree that I think the negotiations start. I mean, we've seen that the talks with CBS have quietly begun, but I think that the market slows how fast this truly resets. I think we obviously get a new deal sometime in the near future. The NFL already accounts for something like 35 to 40% of the $30 billion media rights market in the US. So that's where we're getting to. How big could the number potentially be? I know that Fox and Disney and the other bidders are certainly budgeting for this reset, but how much more money could potentially be in the pool if they're going to double what the NFL is getting currently? And I think that just begs the question, how much more could they get, and who really blinks first? But, I think the big kicker is whether the NFL goes to an 18-game season. I think that's really the ace up their sleeves. So let me ask you this as a follow-up. Does the NFL expand to 18 games as part of this next cycle?
I don't think so, just because the CBA goes out till March 2031. But it's a bargaining chip, right? A super powerful bargaining chip, and obviously more games, more money, more content. That's a no-brainer. So I think starting that discussion makes this a very credible discussion. I think it allows you to create a lot of new packages, right? You can foreshadow, what might be possible in that era.
I think that they could take these new games, they could package them with international games, they could increase the investment that they're getting from Netflix, possibly bring in a new bidder like an Apple. I think you kind of have to use it. You use that 18th game to lure in a new bidder like an Apple, and then use the competition of those bidders to justify the 18th game. If you're getting the value higher than what you were expected or towards that target, I mean, you really have to take that to the Players Association and get approval on potentially getting them to play an 18th game if the money's there and everybody's happy at the end of the day. Ultimately, I think the NFL wins either way, because I just think it's such a strong bargaining chip. As we talk about legacy players, as we talk about streamers, let's stay on the topic of the streaming thread, and let's talk Netflix. Does Netflix go bigger in sports? We mentioned before they have the NFL Christmas games. Those were super successful. They have WWE Raw, they have F1, boxing, tennis, MLB opening night, and home run derby. They have these moments in time, and they really don't seem like they want to be part of the full grind, or maybe it's just not part of the economics. What I'm thinking is that for somebody like Netflix, I mean, if you see a massive subscriber bump during the NFL Christmas Day games or the MLB opening night or home run derby, maybe they're betting on the fact that once people are signed up, their churn is just so low because people get complacent and say, Netflix is essentially a utility like having Wi-Fi and water for me, so I might as well just keep it. Maybe they don't have to spend billions of dollars to buy the full season's rights when they can buy these impactful moment in time. So what do you think that they do? What's going on inside of Netflix headquarters right now? Do you see them making a major rights move in the future?
I do, but I picture them being selective. And to your point, there's diminishing returns. You look at some of these milestone moments for some of these streamers where they had a great show or they bought some great sports content, the NFL example you used, right? And there's this giant bump in subscribers and the whole thing pays for itself right there. Pretty easy. But sure, yeah, what is Netflix in 300 million households globally? And, they're doing pretty well with these one-off events. But I think the answer is yes. For years and years, they said they wouldn't get into sports, right? And then they did. And they're obviously hitting incredible numbers and stuff that we don't know. And maybe this is going beyond a prediction because maybe we know a little too much here. But as you see their business model adopt advertising and get smart about some of those other revenue streams, yeah, it's going to make sense. So my vote is yes, but controlled, careful, but yeah, further and further into sports.
Yeah, and I mean, they're what the NFL is to the media rights space because 300 million subscribers, I mean, they have so much global access to consumers and fans who could potentially consume the property's product all over the world. And the fact that, this is why they have the Women's World Cup, there's that they can offer something that some of these legacy players and streamers that are more focused domestically, have a hard time doing, and that's reach and distribution. And, being selective and being focused on properties that are reaching a global audience rather than just strictly a domestic one, might just be part of, a very smart play for them. And they'll make sure that they keep their budgets tight enough to see consistent growth year over year for their investors. I think what makes this next question even interesting after we got off the topic of Netflix is, whether Netflix is a streaming company or if it's a tech company, but, it's really not just about media companies anymore because we're blurring the lines between the two. Let me ask you a little wild card question. Do we see a tech company buy a team? The rules currently prevent it, but those lines are blurring. We saw the NFL's 10% equity investment in ESPN. The NFL has their private equity rules that allow passive minority stakes up to 10% and no controlling interest. But, we've seen those numbers grow significantly in other sports leagues, over the past several years. So what's your prediction on what's going to happen with investment into teams, specifically from ones that are interconnected to the actual distribution and operations of the property?
It seems like a bit of a conflict, right? To me. No, not yet. Maybe never. First of all, I don't think the NFL wants, public entity zoning. I mean, I'm sure they would love to unwind the situation with Green Bay Packers, publicly reporting numbers, but, to your point, they're definitely going to invest in the picks and shovels around, the sport. It's been publicly stated, right, that they have made a lot of people a lot of money and they'd like to participate in the halo effect of those they lift up, and their business partners. But I just don't picture it going, the other way. But, it does make me think about something, Charles, which is how do franchise values keep going up? There's only so many people who can afford this stuff. And that group has grown at a faster rate as far as if your threshold's billionaire. But it takes more than $1 billion in net worth nowadays to buy one of these teams. So, yeah, how many deca billionaires are there running around? I think the debt ceiling is something that should raise. I think they're underlevered. I think that's a way to drive, demand. But I don't know about corporate ownership. I have a feeling the answer is no. They're certainly not someone who's possibly conflicted because they're in the media business. But as you know, we see this all over the world. I mean, all our work over the years with Club America, and it's the largest, media company in Mexico that owns them. And there's other examples all around the world. Japan, there's some interesting relationships with Japanese baseball and major media conglomerates. So it's not like the system breaks just because it happens, but I would say no.
Yeah, I mean, Rogers opening or owning my Toronto Blue Jays as well, and I know that
Yeah.
they've obviously been very successful, but it does create some interesting conflicts of interest that I think kind of muddy the waters and make other ownership groups, ask some questions because of the access to distribution, that they have compared to having to actually go out and sell your rights. So I think it's a really interesting question. I think from the NFL's point of view, what you said, controlling picks and shovels, that's such an important part of their ecosystem framework. I think that framing is exactly right, and that's what we saw within the ESPN 10% investment. The league wants leverage over distribution. They don't just want the content. They really want to be able to invest in what creates efficiencies, but also massive growth for their property to take them to this next level. Because it's been so impressive so far, but they certainly need to change things up. They can't just rest on their laurels and continue to do what they've done. They need to kind of reinvent themselves from an investment perspective, but also the way that they operationalize their product to fans. And so I think it's a really interesting question. We'll see what happens as to whether tech companies are getting invested. But I just want to shift gears for a second here. And we're going to talk about the biggest single sporting event happening in American soil, arguably ever. Obviously, that's the World Cup this year. The interesting things that we've seen reported about attendance, let's just kind of set the stage a little bit, but like 104 matches over the course of a month. We have FIFA reporting, massive high ticket sales and everything has a wait list, but hotels and booking places in the local business ecosystem are saying that they're seeing very little activity to suggest that people are actually coming to these matches. So, on one hand, we could have a scenario where people realize that the secondary market is going to be very profitable on these things and are trying to get in early through the lottery systems, through sponsors and through FIFA, just trying to get a ticket. And then they'll make the decision about whether that it's actually worth it to fly out and book a hotel and go to these games in the future. Or they could always just, tap into one of these apps and sell for double or triple the price. So, that could be one scenario that's happening. But what do you think? We have 104 matches, over under 90 matches that with complete sellouts with max attendance in the US.
I'm going to say under on real sellouts. And this is the hard part about proving this later as we kind of reconcile this to what happened, right? I mean, we know across sports, there's a lot of claims for sellouts that are well short. And I think we all understand you're not going to have 100% of butts and seats and what have you. But yeah, there are claims versus reality. It's an easy under on reality. Claims make it a little more difficult, but I think you're right. It's good business to push pricing as they have, right? To control the secondary market, right? I think they have on location, putting together these packages, and it's expensive. I mean, a family of four spending what, $2,000, $4,000 for good seats. Is that realistic? It's really interesting what you share about, like hotel bookings, travel, flights, etc. I didn't know that stuff, but that's a little bit of a canary in the mine, or a little bit of an early indicator that it might be soft later. Our very own Julie Angel at Navigate, right, is trying to move some of her tickets, offering them up. So yeah, I think you might be right as far as, play the lotto and then you figure out later what you're going to do. There's so many things about, geopolitics and travel and visas to the US and things that could change too. So I'm going to go under, but I hope it's not like a negative thing about FIFA coming to the US, because it will be record breaking. It'll be record breaking attendance because of our large stadiums. It'll be record breaking revenue and ratings, et cetera, et cetera. Well,
Totally agree. I think it'll be slightly under, but that doesn't mean that this is going to be a failure whatsoever. It's pretty much guaranteed that this will be the biggest global sports event of our lifetime so far, and will probably significantly surpass, the following year's World Cups in the future as well, just because of how grand this is going to be. And as you mentioned, being played in NFL stadiums, it's hard to match that type of attendance capacity. So the interesting thing about this particular event is that when this happened in 1994 last on American soil, the baseline soccer fan in America is just fundamentally different than what it was back then. You've got a generation that has grown up on Premier League, on Champions League, on the MLS in multiple markets, and the massive success that they've seen over the past 10 to 15 years with their growth. I think what the World Cup is really going to do is it's going to be a coming out party for this fan base and legitimize being a fan of soccer. It'll no longer be the Big Four plus MLS. It will certainly be and guaranteed a Big Five with the acceleration that MLS is going to see just from piggybacking off of the momentum and passion that we're going to see from this World Cup in 2026.
I like the idea of Spain, because they're favored. I'm Hispanic. I studied Spanish in Barcelona when FC Barcelona was in their real heyday. Yeah, I mean, I can't help but have a little bias there. What I'm surprised is that Spain is favored. I would think France would be favored, and I think they're the third most likely. England is projected as second most likely. That doesn't make sense to me. So you know much better than me. What is your prediction?
I don't think anybody really cares about our prediction on who's going to win. They want our predictions on sports business. So I'll say England. I'm hoping that they bring it home. I've been over there during a World Cup before, and I've just seen the amount of passion that they have. I think they need this, to be honest. But anyway, from the global stage, let's talk about the most chaotic corner of American sports right now, and that is collegiate athletics. It's been a hot topic for us on these podcasts over the past several months. I'm sure it will continue to be going into football season in August. But if the NFL's media deal feels complex, college sports is playing a completely different game. You got revenue sharing, NIL, private equity. It's a totally new world for athletic directors these days. So let's start with the money. How many schools take private equity over the course of this year? Now, let me remind you, we've seen one so far. We saw the Utah deal with Otro Capital that was reported at around $400 million. We've seen a number of other deals be close and on the doorstep. We've seen the Big 12 exploring a $500 million line of credit. The Big 10, we saw how close that one got. And then revenue sharing's $20 million. I mean, it's literally a soft cap right now. I mean, it's a minimum if you want to compete in Power 4 athletics, but virtually, if you want to win the CFP, you have to get closer to doubling that. So by the end of 2026, what's your opinion, AJ? How many schools take capital?
I'm going to say 5 really take capital. I'm not counting sort of line of credit provided through the conference or sort of some of these bundled structures, that aren't exactly, an investment in equity or truly aligned, basically off the revenue stream as a percent, or some of these structures that you and I have worked on. And I know we've covered this topic extensively, so I just reference people to our library of episodes on this if you want to go deep. But the high level summary for me is I really worry about this. There's this incredible arbitrage opportunity, right? So can investment in college athletics work? Heck yeah. Would I like to invest in it? Yes. With the right governance, incentive structures, if I know they're going to deploy it in positive ROI investments, all that kind of stuff that we talk about ad nauseum. So anyway, to not repeat ourselves here too much, I think they will succeed, but there will also be some fantastic failures and regrets. And I worry about it a great deal. I worry about their preparation and the experts they bring to the table as they make these generational decisions. But I guess I worry about college athletics overall. So maybe that just goes without saying. Yeah. What's your guess?
I mean, we've beaten the proverbial dead horse on this. The concern that you had about schools not doing their homework is real. I mean, we've seen some of these early stage deals, where the government's terms were, let's say, not exactly favorable to the athletic department long term. I do think that we see 5 to 10. I think it's very dependent because it's somewhat been conference driven. At least the deal terms that have gotten the closest to being finalized, other than the Utah deal, have really been conference driven, which should preclude a lot of these schools from having to go out and get their own capital through some other means. But I think that since that we've seen those slow down, or in the Big Ten's case, pretty much stop dead in its tracks, I think the problem's not going away. The schools are still going to have to find a solution for this. So I think that the fact that the Big Ten deal did stop dead, does create even more opportunities for some of those schools to go out and try to chase these capital relationships individually. So I'm also saying 5 to 10. I was probably saying 5 to 10 last year, probably should have been, but I think that the pressures will just compound more and more every year. And I think athletic departments, I think institutional leadership, I think board of trustees, are really seeing the writing on the wall right now, and see that there needs to be a solution to this particular situation. And it's not going to come from the NCAA, and it's not going to come from federal legislation. So we have to learn how to play by the rules. And I think once you take that outside capital, your incentive structures really change. It changes your incentive on how do you pay your revenue generating employees, how you hire and fire. But I think that's a good thing for collegiate athletics. I think that's what could solve this gap that you've talked about ad nauseum, about the fact that, the NCAA really only monetizes 57 cents on the dollar compared to their pro sports competitors when it comes to fan passion and following. And I think a large solution to that is how you incentivize and hire the right people within athletic departments in order to capitalize and capture some of that gap that we've been seeing consistently over the years. But we've talked about collegiate athletics. I also direct our audience towards that library because there's extensive conversations about this topic. But let me ask you another question that's still on the topic of private equity, and I think honestly it could be more important. But they must be tired of this 3-year diligence run around trying to invest into collegiate athletic departments. And I mean, we've talked to them, and we know that they are. So we see them, poking around other avenues into sports, whether that's agencies that, are anchored in collegiate athletics revenue generation and are, instilled into 50, 60 athletic departments. We're talking, Learfield, for example. We're talking Wasserman. What do you think? Give me some predictions on private equity in sports in general. What's the direction that they're looking at right now?
Well, I think there were public comments. I know there were from Arctos. I think it was Ian Charles, said, forget it. It ain't going to happen in this space. It's too hard. Governance, incentives, structure. That might have been out of frustration, because obviously they pursued some deals and, deal fatigue is a real thing. And, they have to really be conscientious of the opportunity cost of their time as they look at deal flow and what's going to close. So, I think that's a very real concern. Now, there's enough firms chasing it and there's enough interest in it. And there's that arbitrage opportunity you described that, I think it's worth the chase. I mean, our business has been wonderful in college athletics and it was very painful in the early years, but there's this moat. But once you're over it, once you're in, that community, there's opportunity everywhere you look, right? There's chances to make a real difference in these universities. So, I think, a patient, persistent money, it might be more family office type, investments, but there's a there, but there's no doubt if you're Arctos and you're trying to build your portfolio and there's a limited amount of bets you can place and you're in a rush, I can understand why you get turned off. It's just, the future is so uncertain. You don't really know what the structure of the sport is going to be in the future. So these are some tough bets, really tough bets to make. Private equity likes certainty. They like transparency. They like, defendable rights. I mean, there are some serious challenges. Let's put it that way.
I got a note here on whether we think that real federal legislation is going to save collegiate athletics by next year, but I think we can probably just spend very little time on this topic.
Well, it's not impossible. I almost regret some things I said with John Wilner and John Canzano on their podcast, where I think I upset some clients in saying collective bargaining, that's the solution. But I don't realistically think that's going to happen, or not anytime soon. But what I do think is possible is that you could replicate the outcomes of collective bargaining in a bill. Right now, they're just missing that voice of the athlete or some of the obvious things that one would negotiate for if they had a seat at the table. But I hear what you're saying. I think most people at least read a little bit about the Trump meeting, and I think he came out saying he's going to just put out an executive order that'll take us back to the way it used to be. Obviously, that's not going to succeed. It's not realistic. Just so I guess I would say partial progress, no solution, but I do think there's a solution out there. I think if you brought a bill, to Congress that was reasonable, that it would pass. And I don't think we're that far away. I think the athletes would trade away a lot of rights. I mean, they want to choose where they go to school. Many of them do want degrees. There are reasonable trade-offs and a lot of room to play here with the money. I know we've said this a ton on collegiate specific podcasts. So again, reference to the library there. But for those listening to this and only this, college athletes are getting, let's call it from the institutions, 25 cents of gross revenue, roughly right now on the dollar. So 25%, I should say. And in the pro sports world, it pretty consistently hovers around 50 cents on the dollar or 50%. So that leaves a lot of room to increase benefits and come with some smart, cost benefit trade-offs in something that would pass as a bill. I would kill to be sitting in that room and share some of that stuff because I think it's completely possible. And the alternative, what we have right now, is really painful, really, really inappropriate.
Well, I know that I was dismissive around federal legislation being a solution, but I really do hope that we see something that can, save the sport, I guess you could say. I mean, this is across football, basketball, women's sports, Olympic sports. We're talking programs wide. It needs to have something that can satisfy all parties. And you're right. You need to bring the athletes to the table if you're talking about, early stage solutions to this problem that are going to be, immortalized through Congress and legislation. There's an interesting thing where, I've been watching this NCAA tournament so far, and on Twitter, on TV, I mean, we take a look at the starting lineup for some of these schools, and you look at the last 4 years and where they played, and it's a different school every single year. And I mean, before we had guys who spent 4 years at school, and it was exciting to see their growth and trajectory and their direction of their stardom, growing at tournament and year after year. I think let's talk a little bit about the NCAA tournament. We've talked a lot about expense pressures. Let's talk a little bit about revenue generation opportunities. This tournament, again, has been super exciting. Some great upsets. Obviously, expansion is on the table there. More inventory, as we said, with the NFL in the 18th game, more inventory equals more media revenue. And we know that their last deal, the one that they're currently in, is heavily undervalued. So, the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, he said that he's in favor for it. I think that the majority of fans are probably in favor for it. Like, give me more of this basketball in March. It's like, honestly, one of my best sporting events to tune into. So what do you think? Do we see expansion in time for the next
I
tournament?
think the answer is yes. I'm a little surprised to hear you say you think fans want to see an expanded tournament. Uh, It's a beautiful thing as it is. It's hard to remember to get your bracket in time. These play-in games. I would prefer that new products be created. A secondary tournament or a tournament that you play in, or all-star. Think of what the NBA does with all-star, or mid-season, early season tournaments. I'd rather see new products, new tentpole events for the sport of college basketball than just keep expanding the tournament. It's more than just the argument, that it devalues the regular season and such. It just feels like, I think we could be more creative as an industry on this, I guess. But yeah, to answer your question, the NCAA does need a reset on this deal. So if you keep opening up the deal early and getting incremental grabs at money, you prevent yourself from a fresh reset. So that worries me. But yeah, it's going to happen. I think we probably know too much, so that's unfair to call that a prediction. Yeah, I would implore them to think about future optionality and flexibility and the changing landscape of college athletics. A friend I trust a great deal said, look at the CFP distribution and how it's shifted, right? The lion's share shifting toward the power conferences. And ask yourself what happens with the NCAA basketball tournament. How long before power basketball programs look around and say, why are we getting 20% of the distribution from the tournament? when we are overwhelmingly the ratings, you know what I mean? And the national championships and what have you. And I think it's a good question. Once this football thing gets sorted and settled, right? Everyone looks at it as an 85-15, so they're concentrating on football. But as soon as that is sorted, and you have to think we're within 2-3 years of a more mature state, right, for college football, eyes will then turn to basketball, and they'll look back at this deal and sort of say, wait a minute, what happens here? Did we leave room and flexibility? Um, that's, yeah, that's tough. But yeah, will it expand? Yes. Everyone needs more money right now. And, the NCAA is going to do whatever it can to find more money for its membership, I'm guessing. But boy, I wish we were working on this one. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, you know what? I think the Power Four schools who are competitive are also saying, why am I being left out to let in a 15th or 16th seed, right? Like they're obviously more competitive. I think that there's been a lot of great schools that have been left out. So maybe I should caveat that when I say that fans want more expansion to be expansion of the right teams. We see the same conversations happening on the CFP side in college football. There has to be some logic to expansion and who we're letting in other than just conference champion. And we need to admit that there's, a massive disparity between the resources, the competitiveness, the talent of the schools that are playing at the highest level versus the schools playing at the second or third tier. So I think expansion with logic is a really good idea that will increase viewership and attention and passion and potentially create, some amazing first round matchups and some Cinderella runs in the future. So I'm hoping for it. I mean, traditionalists never like it until it happens. We saw this with we saw this with Major League Baseball rule changes, and then suddenly everybody loves the extra drama or the fact that the game doesn't take 4 hours anymore. So, people don't like it when it's being talked about, but once it actually happens, it becomes, very easy for people to forget the old days and kind of come into this new normal. So let's talk a little bit about the other place where we're really seeing these big numbers live. Beyond the NCAA expansion, I'm sure they're going to get a massive increase on their tournament deal. But let's talk about franchise sales in general, because this is a super hot topic right now. Expansion is alive in 2 of our major leagues right now. We're talking about franchise sales in the NFL, MLB. We're in a moment where these valuations are doing things that would have seemed absurd even 5 years ago. And you talked about it a little bit before about how many people can actually afford these teams now with the growth rates that we've been seeing, over the past 10 to 15 years. So I'll start with the biggest one right now and asking you about the Seahawks sale and whether it's going to push 10 billion. And to just give a little bit of context to our audience, what's been rumored and expected so far is it's going to be around $7 to $10 billion. The NFL average valuation, according to Forbes, is $7.6 billion. And Navigate, we actually have our own in-house valuation tool where we've pegged the Seahawks at around $9.91 billion on paper. So what do you think, AJ? I hope I didn't bias you with that, but does it approach 10 billion?
I don't think so. No. I'm going to guess closer to 8 billion. And even that, I feel a little silly saying such a large number, but I want to hear what you said a second time. Forbes average NFL valuation is, did I hear 4.6 billion?
So,
okay. Thank you for correcting me. Yeah. There's a lot of money in Seattle. It's just human nature, recency bias. They just won a Super Bowl with a really young coach. They have a great fan base. So I'm probably being conservative in saying 8 billion, but especially because, Forbes is quite often too conservative. It undervalues teams, what we see in an actual transaction. I'm probably being too conservative, but I'm going to say 8 billion. For better or worse. I'm surprised our tool that's coming out and predicting valuations is saying almost 10 billion. I'm pretty proud of the work that we do. I think that we tend to be more accurate than what you typically see out there from, journalism, let's say, or a guess or, sort of expert forecasts. But 10 billion for the Seattle Seahawks, that's hard for me to believe.
Super Bowl champ,
True. Yeah.
Seattle Seahawks. And I wonder how that plays a factor. I mean, you talked about the Seattle tech wealth concentration. I think that's genuinely factor here. I mean, we know one of those players are going to be bidding for the Seattle NBA expansion rights as well. So maybe that takes one of those major players out. But still, you take this once in a generation chance to own the Seahawks. We know how much of a stable, high growth entity that owning an NFL franchise is. On top of that, you add that Super Bowl halo effect. I'd actually be interested to see if a team has ever been up for sale right after they've won a Super Bowl and how that might have affected, the premium that was applied. I think that it gets close, and I think this is one of the predictions that we're probably furthest away on. So it'd be interesting to see this time next year if the deal's done, how much it actually came out to. And I think that competitive tension, that you have with all of those major players that still have strong ties to Seattle, even though that they might not live there anymore. I think that you could see that number pushed up closer to 10.
Are you allowed to change your opinion like in the moment? I didn't even take the time to think about the TV deal, and I don't think it's going to double. That doesn't seem realistic. And obviously, they never really double, right? It's the CAGR, increases over time, so it looks like it's doubling,
Sure.
a prior deal. But let's pretend that it is a 50% bump in the over the term and length of the deal. Um, that alone would equate to what, like 150 plus million incremental per year per club. And these valuations are 10x revenue. So that's 1.5 billion right there. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be a forward looking assessment, right? Not a trailing assessment. So yeah, I'm going to be wrong here. You're right.
And it's probably one of the most important line items in kind of the due diligence process as well. If the league or the conference, I mean, we've been on this with many of these types of deals. I mean, if they have a strong TV deal that's really anchoring the highest percentage of the revenues that are coming in, that spells stability, and that's what these investors, what private equity wants to see, because it's predictable growth and it's predictable revenue streams that they can bank on year over year. So, okay, let's change your prediction. You've come closer to 10. I'm glad I've been able to convince you live. I mean, it's great that this is going out to the entire world and doesn't just happen on our Wednesday
Yeah.
calls. But yeah, this is good. So I love that we stayed on this topic so much, because I think that franchise valuations, I think that expansion, I think that team sales are, going to be one of the most massive stories for 2026. And obviously it'll bleed into 2027 and 2028 with predicted MLB expansion. But let's take it from Pacific Northwest down to San Diego in Major League Baseball. We have 4 bidders confirmed so far. Supposedly the target is around $3 billion. Our valuation tool that we spoke of earlier with the Seahawks deals pegs them at $2.8 billion. But there is this big level of uncertainty around the MLB CBA expiring in December of this year, and pretty much a guaranteed lockout or massive structural change to the operations and economics of Major League Baseball and being a team owner. So I know that you're close to this one. I don't know how much you can give a prediction on this, but let me just ask you, does this sale close, or does the labor risk and the impending CBA negotiations impact, one, the price and the timing
Yeah,
of
it
this?
closes. It closes at record high, and it's I do know too much, so let's not call this a prediction, but it'll be above your prediction, our prediction. But if I could defend our methodology, I think that's a reasonable number for the Padres, and I think they're going to sell for an unreasonably high number. And we'll all suffer from that same recency bias that we referred to earlier, and we'll consider this a market reset. But something a very wise friend who really knows baseball shared with me just last week. He said, summers in San Diego sounds pretty nice, doesn't it, for an owner? Not a bad place to spend your summers. Realistically, you got to live there if you're a baseball owner, given the number of games, or you probably should. And so there's some premiums here that just don't make a ton of sense. But yeah, so I would defend our methodology and your projection and tell you that it's going to be too low.
I guess with our proprietary valuation tool, we got to start building in a weather premium
Well,
into our model. I
well,
think that's
all
something we
joking
can add.
aside, okay, it depends on the sport, right? I mean, football, is it that big of a concern to go there 8 times a year? It's not. I mean, it's a real variable. In fact, I don't know how transparent we're going to be with the methodology, but there's no question. I mean, we're talking about a small set of bidders, and I do think some things that we will see. I think we've discussed this on some recent podcasts. I'm pretty skeptical about the future of the overall stock market, and valuations and, just sort of the economy in general. I would expect it to be soft, flat, there to be some pain here in the near and medium term future in the US. And these things really do affect people's wealth and their ability to buy sports franchises. People of that wealth, they own it usually in their business or in real estate or in the market overall, so they have an increased exposure to what happens in the markets. And, it is absolutely a factor of what these franchises sell for and what they're worth. There's just no doubt about it. So what I would predict is that, I'm not going to say sports valuations go backwards, but I would say that just as the markets I expect to be soft, weak, or even to go backwards in the not too distant future, I would expect the market to be soft for a while on sports. There's television uncertainty and that model. And if I'm right about the economy, and what a terrible prediction to make, you can be sure I'm going to be wrong saying something like this publicly. But if that were to happen, you could see the less attractive clubs having a hard time trading. There being no buyer. So what is the market price when there's zero buyers and someone needs to sell because of a death or a divorce or something? With that said, I think the premier clubs will keep outstripping. What is the price on something? I think the Forbes valuation for the Cubs is $5 billion. There's no question in my mind. Maybe I'm biased because they're a client. We love those guys, but there's no question in my mind. The Cubs go for sale right now. It fetches a lot more than $5 billion. So I think the premier clubs, and San Diego is winning, beautiful place to live. I think you could call it a premier club right now, even if it's not a premier market. What competition do they have in San Diego, right? I mean, you own the town. So anyway, I apologize for rambling, but I just wanted to give some personal insight to that. Thankfully, the Navigate team doesn't adhere to my personal opinion. They do more rigorous work than that, but I think it's a variable. I think it's a real thing. I think people forget we're talking about a limited number of very wealthy people bidding on this scarce, rare asset, and that creates a lot of variance. And it's often very disconnected from fundamentals. You could almost ignore them at times.
Well, I mean, we trumpet that all the time when it comes to these franchise sales, how, it's really dissolved and separated from fundamentals. But I think that's why you find so much interest in these things. And sometimes it seems irrational, but to be a team owner, but, consistently over several years, we've seen the growth of franchises outpace, the indexes within the United States. We've seen it be pretty much resistant to any type of massive business and cyclical changes that are happening within the country or globally. And it's really scarcity driving that model. But there's one aspect, which is the elephant in the room right now, that could be an interesting factor in this. And it's really, I don't know how much uncertainty this is for a MLB owner or potential MLB owner, because I guess the way that they're looking at this upcoming CBA renegotiation is that either it stays status quo and I know the economics, or it's going to get a hell of a lot better for us if we actually implement some type of cap and floor. So maybe that they're only thinking of this as kind of a one-way risk reward scenario where there's definitely outsized reward if the CBA negotiations go the way of the owners. But let's talk about this impending lockout for a little bit. The CBA expires in December 1st of this year. Owners want a salary cap, as I mentioned. The Players Association are obviously strongly opposed. There's a few bargaining chips that could be passed both ways in order to make those happy. But again, going from no cap and no ceiling on your income to a hard cap is something that is going to be a large pill that the Players Association is going to have to swallow. Whether that's just perception or not, they are going to try to leverage this particular deal term to the highest of their ability to get something commensurate in return. So the league is already prepared for an impending lockout. They have a $2 billion war chest prepared. That's probably more than the players have been saving up. So what do you think happens? Do we get a lockout? I know it's almost virtually a certainty at this point, but let me hear your opinion from somebody that's so close
It's
to the
flattering
sport.
for you to say I'm so close to the sport, but yeah, sadly, yes. I'm afraid there's a very high probability. Um, both sides are prepared for it financially. They're very far apart right now. I've heard some insider stories on the feeling and perspective of players and owners, and it worries me a great deal. I'm worried that they both might be too bullish, too optimistic, too confident, you know what I mean, in their stance and position. And that just makes it that much harder to come together, right? To a reasonable middle. So what leads to someone coming to a reasonable middle? I mean, when you start to destroy value, right? When it starts to cost both sides, and that means missing games or at least a delayed start. And that depresses me to say that. I another thing we're on the outside of and not working on in any way. And boy, do I wish we could be a part of that, to set some false deadlines and some tripwires and some things, to sort of accelerate that realistic meeting in the middle. Baseball style arbitration is such a beautiful thing. For those not familiar with it, each side bids what they think, they're worth. And, you think of like a player and a team, but you could do this for any dispute. And an independent arbiter will choose one of the two. Guess what happens? You do everything you can to make for a reasonable bid or solution, because you don't want to end up, accepting the other person's terms. So quickly, those two race to the center. They race to a solution. So that's just like one example, right? Where there's structures and ways in which two parties could be incentivized to come together quicker versus putting the game at risk. Baseball, as we've probably said too many times on this podcast, we had the good fortune of being involved in the rules changes and their approval from ownership, and this process that began 2019 or even earlier in some instances. And the game is doing so well. It is doing so well. Its growth and the new rules that are going to roll in, I'm sure they're going to be successful, and they're going to be a positive, and it's going to be quick, right? And without a ton of friction. And there's just so many good things happening for baseball, but yet so much to grab. Baseball, we have our Michael Jordan, right, in Otani. We have fully functioning leagues in Asia, and athletes that are frequently matriculating, onto Major League Baseball. It's just a dream come true. Can you imagine if the NBA had these advantages, had, all these, a disproportionate amount of international players in their league, in their sport? All these advantages baseball has, while the NFL is desperately trying to catch up, with global, appeal and interest. And the NBA is reaping those rewards and doubling down and continuing to invest. And it's the solution for so many domestic sports leagues and abnormal growth. And the baseball basically has the most built-in advantages for that versus those other leagues. And that's all still there for the taking. I do not believe that's been anywhere near optimized. And so what a terrible time to take a step backwards and to alienate fans. Being a Canadian, Charles, I know you were young, but I'm sure you have some memory of that World Series you stole from the U.S. in '94 and held on to because of a lockout. But I was in those years where I really, was an active baseball fan and playing baseball and stuff back then. And that was painful. It took baseball a long time to recover from that lockout. It's just this self-inflicted wound, this unnecessary foot fault, and it just kills me that I think it's going to happen again.
Yeah, I was young, but, just from reading the reporting, hearing the sentiment from people who were really into Major League Baseball at the time, it did cost the sport real momentum at a bad time. And as you said, it cost my Blue Jays a chance at the three-peat and winning the third World Series in a row. Well, they were 16 games back.
You've got to hold on to it for 2 years in a row there,
Right, so.
because of it. You should be celebrating the lockout, I think.
But you know what? Like what you talked about, I think there were so many important points in there. I was at the World Baseball Classic in Miami, United States versus Dominican Republic. Absolutely great game. It felt honestly like an away game. Whenever the U.S. did something good, you could barely hear anybody in the stands celebrating. And anytime that the Dominicans turn a double play or caught a fly ball, I mean, it was absolute pandemonium in there. So that's built in. And the WBC it's in its infancy compared to some of these other global events in other leagues and things like that. So they have such a good inherent product for international growth, something that all leagues are trying to chase, and the NBA is spending so much money trying to do it. And it's as you said, it's inherent to what baseball is because of the makeup of the players and where they're from and where the talent is located. And the fact that, yes, the Michael Jordan is from Japan, and that kind of gives the link to Asia as well. I mean, it's such a significant inflection point in the time of the sport. And yet, having this lockout looming over their heads, which is pretty much guaranteed, is going to be putting a large stop to that. And I want to remind people, we're filming this on opening night of the 2026 season. I go on Twitter, I see people complaining about the fact that it's not opening day, that they have a game, the Giants against the Yankees on Netflix the night before traditional opening day. I'm like, we might not have baseball next year. Like, do not take it for granted. I am so happy that we're getting baseball right now. It's my favorite sport. So I want people to, the fans to calm down, because this time next year is going to be a sad time for fans of the sport, because you're not going to be able to find it on TV and the stadiums are not going to be open. So I just want people to reconsider their sentiment over, coming into this baseball season. We're going to end this segment now. We've been going for a really long time here, but let's end it on a more optimistic and relevant note on what was announced today. Because the NBA is actually in growth mode. The NBA Board of Governors voted today to formally explore expansion to Las Vegas and Seattle. The rumors are that these bids are expected to be in the $7 to $10 billion range per team. That's Seattle Seahawks range rumors. We've mentioned the new lucrative media deal that they signed with their three partners. The one thing that I want to add is that, there have been some recent major NBA changing of hands within the past year. In 2025, the Celtics sold for $6.1 billion. I mean, that was a record at the time for NBA franchises. And then the Lakers came and they sold for a $10 billion valuation that easily surpassed it. We know that the league is growing internationally because of the strategy that they have from the head office. But, with all that into account, why would an owner go out and pay $8, $9, $10 billion for a blank slate like the Seattle or Las Vegas franchise with no roster, no history? I know Seattle has history, but I'm talking specifically to Vegas here, and no existing revenue, when you could go buy the Celtics, who have won 18 to 20 championships and have a incredibly storied history and have assets like a roster and a building that they play in and guaranteed revenues. Why would an owner decide to purchase that blank slate when they could wait for maybe one of these other teams to come up for sale if the $7 to $10 billion is realistic? So I'm kind of asking you a quick prediction on whether that $7 to $10 billion is realistic and you think it'll fall in there. And then two, hopefully you can expound upon, what I was talking about whether that there's trade-offs between buying a new team for expansion purposes or just buying a team.
Yeah, I mean, that number seems too high to me, but just for context, what's publicly reported, there's obviously nuances there, right? The publicly reported number for the Celtics is not really the number. There's some things that alter it, and there's a lot of ways to structure these things. So using a hypothetical example with expansion, you don't pay that fee up front. It's spread over time. Time value of money can knock that down by 20% and what have you. And there's an incentive to announce a big number, right, to support people's valuations and expectations. And keep in mind that check ends up in the pockets of existing owners. So, there could be motivation. There's always a bias towards short term, put some money in my pocket right now, today, through distributions. But it is pretty interesting to me that they've narrowed the choice to Vegas and Seattle. It seems pretty much fait accompli, right? And Seattle's got an arena ready to go. And because we were fortunate enough to work on the NHL's selection of Seattle and as an expansion site, and then with the launch of the Kraken and what have you, we know there's an arena there that's NBA ready. They'd be top third in the league in revenue if they were bad at running their business, based on existing sponsorship contracts, premium seats, stuff like that, right? That where optionality or contracts exist, planning for future NBA team. So I can see that being a pretty significant number. Of course, then you don't own the arena. There was news recently, not to get into like current events, but they're structuring themselves, the Kraken, right, to be that ownership group, and so you could see the benefits, and they took on a higher percent ownership in the arena as an example. But Vegas, you got to build an arena. I mean, I don't think they're planning to play, where the Knights play, so uh, it's quite a burden on a new owner, not only to write that check in theory, now that I've given all these caveats on timing and what have you, but also have to build a facility and move into a facility and what have you. So yeah, I'm skeptical that's really the number that will be announced. I'm skeptical it's the real number and what someone actually pays as far as time value of money and what have you. But to your point, yeah, the Celtics, they don't own the building. And, imagine if that number was actually even higher than the reported number. So, boy, uh, I don't think it's a bubble. Market price is what someone's willing to pay. And the greater fool theory, right? It doesn't have to be attached to like economic reality. These are vanity assets, and prestigious in so many ways. And they've been a pretty decent store of value, even if they're terrible as far as cash flows. But at some point here, with my larger skeptical view of the overall marketplace and stock market and things like that, at some point this has to calm down a little bit. I feel like we're reaching a point of resistance. So I'm skeptical on, would you say 7 to 9 billion is the publicly reported? 7 to 10? I don't think so.
7 to 10.
7 would be really high in my mind. But wouldn't that be a smart way to anchor high and then make it seem reasonable to settle on a future dollar value of 7 billion? So I'll probably be wrong again.
I'm gonna say 6 billion for Seattle, 7 billion for Vegas. Yeah, it's interesting that this is a foregone conclusion, because if you really wanted $10 billion, you'd open it
Yeah, well,
up to as much
Vegas will get you there with a
possible,
casino,
right?
but yeah,
I
I'm
guess
sorry, I'm cutting you off, but it kills me no one's jumped on Mexico City yet as an opportunity. The NHL's been so progressive in markets and some of its moves, and they have to be, right? Because, they don't have the TV deal and some of those other, participation. They just have other challenges, right, that the other leagues don't. But it just kills me. The NBA is so progressive. Mexico City. Can you imagine bringing those 130-ish million people and that new television market? Now that's additive. If you're an existing owner and you want to make the pie larger, I agree. It's so interesting that the vote is narrowed to those two markets. I I, uh, I get the corruption, I get the crime, but on a global relative basis, God, Mexico is so young. I think the average age is 29 years old there. It's just such a smart long-term bet as an investment. It kills me. So sorry, I stepped on your toes there, but you say other markets, Mexico City. Can you imagine the value of that franchise and that national support of that club? I mean, we know it's possible with Club America, and they have lots of competition, even in their own market. Oof. Yeah. Kudos to whoever has the guts, pulls the trigger, and puts a franchise in Mexico City. I think it will be a giant, giant win.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be considered, obviously for Major League Baseball as well, for those rumors. I mean, the NFL has played many games down there. I mean, it would be sad if we waited so long for international expansion and then the NFL just found the right opportunity in time to say like, hey, we're putting a team there, because it seems like that's such an opportunity for to close that gap that we see between the National Football League and the rest of the big four or five. So I'd love to see one of these leagues just have the guts to be able to do it. I honestly, what it would do to the TV impact of the deal, obviously for the just access to a brand new market for other revenue streams as well. I think it would be a really interesting play, but I think I'm 90 to 95% sure we're going to see two domestic. Oh, I'm 100% sure we're going to see two domestic franchises for this next round of expansion. And I think it's going to be fairly quick. So it'll be an interesting story to follow as to what happens and where these actual valuations net out. But it seems like we're on at least the same side of that $7 to $10 billion range that they've
Yeah,
been
we
going
agree
for.
here. That's good.
All right. Yeah. I think we agreed on most things, to be honest. But if you have your own predictions, we'd love to hear about them. We're going to be recapping this a year from now just to see how close we are to at least some of these predictions that actually do get settled by this time next year. But yeah, that's it. If you've listened all the way here, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Navigating Sports Business. I'm Charles Rolston, joined by AJ Maestas. You know where to find us. You can always find us on our website at www.nvgt.com. And my email is charles@nvgt.com. We would love to talk to you. So please reach out and enjoy some
All right,
baseball
thank you.
tonight.
And please tell us where we're wrong. I want to hear where we're wrong. I know we are. So tell me.